And we are live in the Storycraft Cafe today. We are talking again about our rewrite a book with Dabble challenge that's going on. And last week we had a great conversation about characters, and we really focused mainly on our protagonist. And Josh is frozen. You can unfreeze now, Josh.
Oh, thanks. My connection was kind of wonky there
It's like
for a
it's like
minute.
it's like the end of it's like the end of every episode in the Naked Gun series back in the 80s. You know,
Yeah.
Look how shaky I
I
am.
was waiting for my dog to walk
Yeah.
past.
I was trying to stay still, man. My arms are shaking. I'm like, holy.
Wise guys, the whole bunch of you. Last week we were talking about characters, and we really kind of focused on protagonist and the characters that our stories are mainly about. And I thought it would be fun today if we um, had a discussion about the other characters in our books, the side characters, if you want to, or
The protagonist.
yeah. Well, and sometimes they're antagonists, but not always. Sometimes they bring things to the story that add texture and depth, and allow the writer to bring things to the story without necessarily having the protagonist do everything and just become a Mary Sue. Um, so first off, do you guys have a side character that you have written that you didn't intend to be the star of the show, if you will, but that you really connected with, and you wound up having a lot of affection for this side character for whatever reason? Have you guys ever written a character like that?
Several. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think throughout the Buried Goddess saga, there were a lot of characters that were introduced really just as in fantasy, you name a lot of characters, right? I think we had something like 325 named characters in that series.
That's a
And
lot.
and so throughout time you find yourself looking for a character to insert into a scene, and you're like, well, I already named this character in book 2 chapter 4, and he fits the need for this, right? So you kind of bring him back, and there was a character called Sir Nixeroff, who I'll give you a little bit of a history here.
Did you say Sir Mix-a-Lot?
Nope, Sir
Wiki wiki.
Nixeroff was the name of a good friend's D&D character. I helped create this character, and his backstory was that he was a warrior who cut off the foreskins of his enemy. And Nixeroff is foreskin backwards.
Nice.
Oh my
So
God.
this
Nice.
series went on for several
Did you
years.
really just play Mr. Mixelplick? And
What?
nothing.
From
That's
Superman, Mr. Mixelplick.
Oh.
Yeah.
So this story went on for years, Buried Goddess Saga, and I got one email from a reader one time asking me if I knew that Nixeroff was foreskin backwards.
Did you know that, Steve?
And I said, no, you're kidding. And that was my whole email.
Nice. Nice.
So, yes, Nixeroff became a wild card throughout the series. By book 6, he was, I believe, sort of beloved and hated at the same time. But he was one that I would consider just somebody who was thrown in there as a joke. Sir Nixeroff, stupidest name ever. But he became something valuable.
sounds too Russian.
Yeah. So speaking of a cast of characters that big,
Most English said backwards, by the way, sounds like pseudo Russian.
Right. Yeah, that's a tip right there from Rick. Just spell a character backwards if you need to add some flair. Steve, when you've got a cast of characters that's 300 some odd named characters, how do you track that? How do you manage?
Well,
and
poorly.
how do you
Like,
how do you keep up with characters so you don't forget who they are and where they are? And if you send someone off on a mission, how do you keep all that
I
on the
think
track.
any fantasy author will tell you that they've made mistakes with their characters. That's probably true of space opera. That's probably true of a lot of genres. But for me
Yeah.
personally, it took me 4 books. We were about 600,000 words into this series when I realized we needed a world Bible. And that was because I wrote an entire arc of this story with a character that we killed already. And
Nice.
so it just popped up in my head. This, like, I feel like I was, I think a lot in the shower, and
Yeah.
that's my only time when there's total silence in my house.
Right.
I'm in the shower, and I remembered I had this memory of killing this character, just nonchalantly killing him, and I went back into, like, I think book 2, and I went, "Oh my god, this guy's dead," and I just spent 40,000 words developing this story about this character. So that was when I stopped writing, and I developed the World Bible, where I have a Google Docs sheet that has the name of every named character, and there's an X by them if they're dead.
It's worse than that. He's dead, Jim.
He's dead. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard if you don't have a detailed World Bible. I've done that now for every series that we've written, except for the Black Badge, because that one's pretty simple to keep track of in our heads.
Yeah.
But if it's
Steve,
the more,
I need you to make a world Bible for the whole Drop Trooper universe for me.
but there are people you can pay for that. There's several, right? Like, I know that Galaxy's Edge uses somebody who they paid to go through and read every book and keep a world Bible. And actually, like, I'm sure some of them are absurdly expensive, but like, find a good proofer who is willing to, for a little extra money, proof your book for typos. And then also, every time they come across a named character, named city, named weapon, named ship, named planet, whatever it is, write it down in a world Bible. If there's a description of that character, do yourself a favor and have another column where you describe the character. They're blonde. There's a scar on their left eye, right? That way you're not writing that it's the scar on the right eye for 2 books.
I do that while I write. I have a document. Well, in Dabble, I have a whole section of characters, and most of the time my characters don't have names in the first draft, so I don't worry about it. But in the second draft, when I go back in and add all that stuff in, when I come to the name, I'll add it to the character document, and then I'll just copy and paste the initial description and copy that right under the name. And so if that character ever comes back up again, and I usually have, like, I'll put in parentheses, book 1, this scene, this is what they were doing. And so if I want to change, like, what they're wearing or whatever, I can still maintain, like, character continuity with all the stuff that matters. And then if I ever put them back in a book and something has changed about them, I'll add that in as well and go book 2, whatever else.
It's funny that you bring up the book 1, the book 2 thing, because I actually just formatted a book. For those listening, I don't just write, I also own Athon Books. And so I do most of the formatting.
And he's the president of the hair club too.
President of the hair club. Josh actually helps with the formatting. So that's kind of the tie there. But well, I mean, we're really good friends too, but regardless. So I'm formatting this book the other day, and I get to the end, and the author has his cast of characters, which is clearly just his world Bible copied over into his manuscript.
Just tacked onto the end.
As I'm looking through it, and I don't read through everything that I format. For some reason, as I'm going through this formatting, and something stuck out to me, and it was, I'm formatting book 1, and he's got information about what this character does in book 2 in the cast of characters for book 1. And I'm like, spoilers, holy crap. You can't just copy and paste verbatim the things that you're using.
Right.
I went through that cast of characters. I deleted every reference to, like, what book they're in.
Is this lit RPG?
This is not lit RPG. This is military sci-fi.
Really?
And he's
see too many cast of characters in military sci-fi.
Yeah, he's a great author. So there's no shade thrown at him. But when I saw that, I'm like, man, we got to be careful what we're putting in there, because although we're the publisher, it's not really our responsibility to make sure that what goes into your book is what you want in your book. We didn't write it.
Right.
We don't know exactly. There's so many things we come across that we go, I don't know. And right. And because we're such a fast-paced publisher, we don't always have the opportunity to go back to the author and wait a month for them to return an email.
Yeah, a lot of times it's just Bill, like we'll be on the phone looking at the same thing, going, "Yeah, okay, let's. I think this is what they were trying to do. Let's do that."
So that's just a bit of info, a bit of advice for authors. Like, make sure what you either give to your publisher or format in your book is actually what you want readers to see. Because that would have sucked if a reader read that cast of characters and like, oh shit, that guy dies in book 2. Cool, I don't care
Right.
about him anymore.
Oh, man.
Yep.
That's rough. Josh, you ever had a?
I
Have
didn't
you ever had a?
I swear.
Have you ever had a side character that became more than you envisioned in the beginning?
Yes. In my Tranquility series, I have a character who's she in the first book she gets like a kind of a brief cameo as one of the, so Tranquility is kind of a blend of StarCraft and Titanfall, and the StarCraft elements are the aliens operate as like a pseudo telepathic connected hive mind, and they're controlled by hierarchies of order inside the hive, and so there's some higher level ones and some lower level ones, and this woman was kind of absorbed into the hive, and she operated as one of kind of like a lieutenant, if you would, like that's was her rank. That's not what they called it, but that was, for comparison. And she had a small part in the first book where she was attacking some of the main characters. And when I got to the second book, realized that she would be a cool addition to the cast, but also create a lot of conflict because she had been the enemy in the first book. And so as I developed her character and thought about where I wanted to take her across the trilogy, she became in StarCraft. There is a woman who becomes a Zerg, basically queen, and she takes over a significant population of this alien race called the Zerg, and becomes like an antagonist for the human characters. And I didn't want this character Gray to go in that direction, but I wanted to grow her into this like post-human type character where she was both human and alien at the same time. The series didn't progress that way, like it had to end at book 3. But if I could have taken it further, I would have loved for her to have like a bigger, like more encompassing arc and make her like one of these significant main characters. She does have a big part in book 3, and that element of her, the alien aspect, does come into play in a very important way in book 3. But if it could have gone longer, I would have loved to see her go in much farther in that direction and explore that kind of thing. And that, like, those type of secondary characters are almost more fun to write than the main characters, because you can do so much more. I say outlandish, but I don't mean that. Outlandish things with secondary characters than you can with main characters sometimes, and a lot of times they're more fun to create and write that way.
Rick, with a book series as long as Drop Trooper, do you find secondary characters that you have created that then spin off to their own storylines or on sub series within the same series?
Not Drop Trooper per se, but
Yeah.
in the whole universe, because there's a bunch of different series that are all in that same universe. There's several in there. There was a character in the Acheron series who originally I put in book 2 as a nod to one of my fans, one of the readers, who asked if he could use his daughter's name, and I created this character intending for her to, bow out at the end of the first book. But I liked her so much, she stayed on for all the rest of the series and then into another series too. So, I mean, I I'm not as likely to have a character unexpectedly do something like that because I outline so closely. But
Yeah.
it can happen. Yeah.
Um, when you guys are creating characters, do you ever think in terms of like character archetypes? So, um, if you're thinking about the wise old wizard, or someone that plays that role as a wise old advisor, or the chosen one, or when you're kind of creating your cast of characters, are you thinking in terms of the job that they will perform, the role that they'll portray, and do you kind of cast a book in those? And I don't normally think in terms of archetypes, but when I look back, a lot of times I can see my characters kind of fulfilling some of those roles, but I don't necessarily think of in those terms ahead of time. Do you guys think about that ahead of time? Like, I need someone to fill this role. Let me create a character to kind of play this part.
Well, I mean, in military science fiction, especially, there are certain archetypes that are almost necessary. Like you have the old man, quote
Right.
unquote. Like in the Marines, that's usually a company commander or battalion commander, somebody who's the father figure, the leader to the main character.
Right.
And also there's always some gruff and legendary NCO that winds up having a heart of gold. It's that there's certain things you have to do. So I think about in that terms. I don't typically. I typically just put them in that position and try to build a character who is, you know, had a career in that position. So it's not really an archetype for me, but there are roles they have to fill that I create characters for.
Before I respond, I'll bring
Yeah.
up something that I heard about Jim Butcher and what he does with the Dresden Files. I don't have confirmation that this is true, since Jim and I are not friends. But sorry, that's a little inside joke between me and Hank. But he mentioned one time that he finds out what needs to happen at the end of his book
Yeah.
before he writes the book, and he works backward from what enemy, what character needs to be there in the end, what ultimately defeats that character. How do I set up whether it's the magic or the item or the this or that Dresden needs to achieve the goal at the end, and he builds sort of his whole story from the back forward, which I thought was interesting, and also just seems like the thing to do when you're working on a long series that's first person, and every sort of episode has its arch villain, and you need all that. We did that a little bit with the Black Badge series because we heard that Jim Butcher did it, and Black Badge is so similar to Dresden in the Wild West that it just made sense to kind of steal his methods. For me, the stories that I tend to write are so character focused that of course there's a plot, of course there's a story, but like for instance with the Raptors series, the superhero series that Chris Vallon and I write, like we're so focused on what our characters are doing and how they're developing and the fun of a superhero story that sort of by the time we get to the big bad, it has almost naturally developed itself through something we did. And I guess that's not a great answer that naturally it happened, but like I sometimes feel like when you write a lot, I don't know about you, Rick, Josh, whatever. I don't know if you get to that 25% point in your book on purpose, where there's that moment, that inciting incident, whatever it is, right? Like, I don't know that I ever go, oh, I'm at the point where I need this to happen.
Right.
Yeah, I don't do that either.
You tell enough stories, you learn how to keep it interesting. And
You get a feel for the ebb and flow of
if I'm
of
bored,
the
you're
narrative.
bored, right? And so like
Right.
this is for me, I go, okay, yeah, I'm leading up to this, and I know kind of when it's gonna happen. Then recently, though, with Dragon Blood Assassin, I do a lot of co-writing, right? Because I own Athon, and it's hard for me to do my own writing and do that at the same time. So Andy and I are writing this story, and we're in book 3, and we had written close to 400,000 words before we knew who this character that we kept talking about. We created this character called Red Claw, and he only exists in like letters that are written to a bunch of enemy people, and we didn't know who it was until like a month and a half ago, while we were already writing book 3 where he's supposed to be revealed.
Sounds
And
like an energy drink.
it does. Energy drink / White Claw. So we actually had a conversation where we went, okay, who have we already established that might play this villainous role well? And the answer was very clear. We knew, both of us went, oh, duh, he's already there. He's done everything duplicitously in a way that works really well. It was not an obvious choice. So like there were some obvious characters, and we're like, no, those are too obvious, but here's the one. And so 400,000 words in, we went, okay, here's our villain. Again, I don't suggest that's the way to do it, but sometimes it works out.
What about you, Josh?
I forget your original question.
Because I talked so long, I know.
Yeah.
Do you think in terms of casting characters and having them fill particular roles?
Were you typing to somebody on your phone, Josh?
Yeah, I was. Yes and no. Like I know I always start with plot and then kind of work out characters around that.
Yeah.
I have in the past created where I knew that I wanted a comic relief character, and so I created that character and everything they did around not 100% around that purpose, but
Yeah.
I made sure that they provided that element to the book. And I knew that
Hank back in.
yeah, no shit. I knew that I needed characters
Still
that
I thought the rapture came in, and I was excited.
Yeah,
man. Whew, thank you,
curses, Hank. No, but I think of like almost kind of what Steve was saying about needing something to happen at certain points in the book, and I see that stuff in the outline, and like when I outline through chapters, and so I can count every chapter, and usually I try to average 2,500 words a chapter, so I know if I get to say like chapter 10 or 11, let's just say, that's around where the inciting incident needs to happen. And so I'll develop everything before that leading up to that point. And then I'll look at the different elements of things that are going on and say, okay, what kind of character do I need here or here? For instance, there's a character in my Weaponized series that shows up in book 2, who is the character that gave one of my main protagonists all of her advanced, I call them peripherals, but they're basically cybernetic implants, like bioneural matrix kind of stuff in your mind and all that. And so I knew that I needed a character for that. And so what I did was I just thought of what is a character in this landscape. They're all about the tech. What are they going to do? Like how are they going to live? And in this case, I thought this guy wants to be an AI. He wants to be on the same level. He's tired of limitations of the biological brain, the biologicals, all that stuff. So I made him this like giant mechanical spider, that the body of the spider holds the brain and the other biological aspects of his body and maintains it through like, protein gels and all of this stuff. But that's just a step. Like later on, I'm going to take it to where he actually does figure out how to do the transference and become an actual AI. But that was a really cool secondary character that's probably not going to do much else in the book. But I created him specifically because I needed a character to give the protagonist something else. And a lot of times you'll have like a character that provides a sword or a gun or whatever, and you don't do a whole lot with them. With characters like this, like I was saying before, like you can do a lot of crazy things that people will look at and go, huh, that's really cool, but then they can move on. But I like to be able to do that, and it doesn't lock me into having to write a POV of someone that it doesn't have a body, right? That's locked into this thing and thinks in a weird way and all that stuff. I can do that kind of from the outside. And I love doing those kind of characters.
Yeah. Um, I I don't know who said this originally, but well, anytime you're talking about characters, one of the first things that people will tell you is identify who your character is and what your character wants. What is it that your character wants to accomplish? And you kind of need to know that ahead of time. Um, and I heard someone say one time, I don't know who or where, but they said take a character, make them a likable character for the reader, someone that they want to root for, and then stick that character in a tree, and then set the tree on fire, and then now you have a story. Um, s- so if we create a character that's likable and we give them a purpose and a mission, um, you have to throw things in their way, obstacles for them to overcome. How do you guys think about providing obstacles for your characters, putting things in their path that will frustrate them and um, you know ultimately make them have to problem solve? Um, how do you start thinking about ways to prevent your character from getting what they want?
I think the biggest challenge there is doing that in a way that doesn't also make your character look like an idiot. Right.
Right,
That's
right. That is a
100%.
fine line a lot of times.
how do I make him not look stupid? How do I make him not get her, whatever, make them
Yeah.
not get rescued all the time? How do we put a paperclip and a rubber band together and create a MacGyver situation? Those are not easy. I mean, kudos to the freaking MacGyver writers, right? What were you gonna say, Hank?
Yeah. Well, but at the same time, prevent them from becoming a Mary Sue. Anyone who can just take a rubber band and a paper clip and solve any problem.
I mean, the
That's a
fascinating thing
very
is
fine line.
the genre makes up how this works, right? In lit RPG, you don't do tension. You don't put a character in a tree. You do not. Absolutely. Like all the things we learned as writers,
Yeah.
tension is story, give them obstacles, all of that. That doesn't work in the lit RPG game lit community. They do want, and I don't speak for everybody, and this is not a
Yeah.
totally general statement, but by and large, your character needs to be a Mary Sue. They want an overpowered character that metagames the entire system and doesn't make mistakes, because then they look at it and go, "Why is he so stupid?"
Well,
Whereas
where do you get tension from then?
it's more just about the story, the journey. Think about playing a video game on easy mode. That's kind of you build the character, you build the world, you build the magical system, which is also just like a video game style system, D&D style system. It's all about the system in lit RPG.
Yeah.
So there's so many different like genre things that determine how you do this as well. But when we're talking about military sci-fi or fantasy, traditional style fantasy, that's when you throw your character in the dungeon with a million spiders and tell him to get out.
I've never thrown a military sci-fi character into a dungeon with a million spiders, but
I did say fantasy also. That is when you throw your character onto a derelict ship filled with sloth-like or slug-like monsters, right? And
that's a great part about mil sci-fi is you don't have to think of new ways to screw your character over. All you have to do is look at the military and look at what's happened in wars, and there's just plenty of stuff that screws people over. You got incompetent officers, inexperienced people making plans, faulty intelligence, um, the enemy, doing their part to make sure your battle plan doesn't survive contact with them.
now, what
Uh,
happens when your superior officer, is so incompetent and inept that the reader goes, "There's no way he would have gotten that position if he's that stupid."
well, you have to make clear how he got the position in that case. and it's happened in real life. Trust me. It mostly happens when you have a peacetime military that's suddenly thrust into a war, and none of them have any experience at war.
Yeah.
Or they create a sweet PowerPoint presentation and impress the general, and then
exactly.
the general's like, make that guy a commander.
That's how people in peacetime get those positions, by impressing people through their by the book attitude. You have to make that clear, that by the book and spit and polish, that's how you get promoted, how you get positions in peacetime. And then a war happens and people like that are useless and everything gets changed. And we saw this like recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. Wartime hit, everything changed. And then once it shifted back towards like an occupation and kind of halfway peace, then everything went back to by the book, spit and polish, people getting slapped on the back of the wrist for things like uniform infractions and not having their weapon exactly the way the book says it should be. That just happens naturally. So having officers who don't know what they're doing and battle plans that aren't based on reality and faulty intelligence, that's just military history. So all that stuff is good. I figure that all that stuff is enough of a dumpster fire without throwing too much else in. Although you do throw in like personal conflicts, because those happen in the military too.
Right.
And
well, anytime you have two humans together, you're going to have personal conflicts at some point.
I think it's even easier with military science fiction than it is with other like space opera, because you don't have to come up with new stuff to throw in their way.
Right. I like to so I said the last time that I hate the easy button. So I like to come up with a very interesting problem and work the character through that problem. But then on top of that, I throw wrenches at them constantly. Like if they need to solve problem 1 by going to checkpoint A and B, I throw a wrench in between there and don't allow them to get to checkpoint A. And then they're forced to redirect and do something else. But also on the small scale, like if they're having a fight, and we talked, Mark Graney was on the show the other day, and we talked about Burner, and there's a fantastic opening underwater scuba fight scene in that book. And on top of trying to evade all these Russian bodyguards, putting limpet mines on the ship and all that, he gets into a hand-to-hand with knives underwater, and then you've got spear guns on top of that, and then you've got all that going on. You've got the mines counting down, you've got this fight and how he's going to get away from these people, and then he cuts his oxygen, he cuts his mask, and he can't breathe. And like it just like, when as a writer, when you think of, yeah, I think this is everything that I can throw at that character, you're usually missing one or two other things that you can do to make it that much, because like fundamentally that Core Gentry is going to survive this particular incident. But then you get to a point while you're reading and you're like, oh yeah, this is really good, this is bad, and then you get your air hose cut and you're like, oh, it's way worse now, and like, so that like the small incremental escalation in danger, and it doesn't have to be a fight scene, it could be anything, but just layering it and layering it and layering it, instead of just like throwing one problem, they have to solve that problem, and then they get another problem, and throwing another problem, and like stepping it, you like stack them incrementally on top of each other and do it before they fix the first problem. Like it's like a stair step all the way up. And I try to do that with all of my situations, where I'm like, okay, this is the most horrible thing that can happen right now. What else can I do? And then I layer that on top. And so your characters are always, like I said, it doesn't have to be a fight, but they're always working through some level of conflict.
By the way, just as a side note, underwater scuba fight scene is the name of my new band.
I love it.
Ska band.
I love it.
It wouldn't make much
It's a
sense
ska band. No,
it wouldn't make much sense to have a scuba fight scene that wasn't underwater, though.
True.
Yeah, you can't really have a scuba fight scene out of water. You'd look really stupid with those little
Yeah.
flippers on and the thing in your mouth, and you're just on the dock, slapping each other.
Although that would be really funny, and I'm gonna
Yeah.
try it now.
Scuba fight scene in space.
Ooh,
Ooh, yeah, I like it.
So,
It-
so
it's-
maybe the other side of the coin from frustrating characters, what about character faults? Letting a character's humanity come out by showing that they're not perfect people. But that's another character trait that it could walk a fine line, because if a character has too many faults, they just become horrible people that no one roots for. Um, so how do you add a little humanity to a character without overplaying your hand and making them unlikable?
If you don't mind, I'll go first. But I have two main characters in Weaponized that come from completely different backgrounds. One's a spy and one's a soldier, and their faults, if you want to put it in that context, one is just totally used to doing his own thing and going off the rails and doesn't have any oversight. He can basically do whatever he wants. The other one is a soldier. And so they're both constrained by the way that they operate and the way that they do things. And so to each other, to the other, both of those are faults. But to themselves, that's just who they are. And so um, you can create conflict, and the way I do it in the book is put those two characters together, each think the other is wrong, but they're both working towards the same end goal. And that first of all, it allows you to kind of more well define who that character is by how they're doing things.
Yeah.
But also you can show, and the way I'm trying to do it in Weaponized is show how, as they progress through the story, the two faults of each kind of blend together to create a singular
Giant fault.
um just a singular way of doing things. They kind of blend their two worlds together to kind of go forward. And but I mean, faults are kind of, it's a sticky area to be in, right? Because you don't want to overdo it, and you don't want to choose the wrong fault, right? Like you don't want to make the fault like a disability, right? You don't,
Right.
yeah, so it could be that a guy is too honest, or that they can't see past. A lot of people can't self-reflect. That is a big fault that a lot of people have. That they, no matter what happens or what somebody says, they're never wrong. They can always like justify and extrapolate reasons why they are correct, and they're never going to see the other side. I think that's a really good fault to write in fiction, because most people can reflect and empathize with that, even if they're the person that doesn't see their own faults, right? So I try to keep it as subtle as possible when putting faults in characters. I don't know. I think you can go kind of overboard on it sometimes.
it feels a bit like when you have a job interview and they're like, "What's your work?" I care too much.
Yeah,
I care too
I
much.
work
Too much
too
room for
hard.
reflection.
I work too hard, right?
I have a good friend who he's a little overweight. He would tell you that, and his
Well,
answer
I am not overweight. I am down 10 pounds.
his answer to this question is my favorite my favorite answer on earth. The interviewer said, "What's your greatest fault?" He said, "Sprinting long distances." He got the job just for that answer.
Nice.
Oh man. Steve, I have a specific question that I want to ask you about the Black Badge series, and that pertains to this particular question. But Rick, when you're writing military sci-fi, does what you talked about earlier, just kind of the inherent um uh, kind of governmental ways, things that factor into the military structure, and all of the weaknesses that are exposed by that, do does does that sort of thing play into character flaws and um, making sure characters have some humanity? Because we know that these systems are ultimately going to break down and fail at some point.
Well, especially for the main character, like Josh was saying, you have to make sure that you don't overdo the flaws because people like a flawed character, but they don't like a real flawed character. They don't like somebody
Right.
who has actual character flaws like you would find in real life. They want somebody who's a hero, but with just some tiny flaw that makes them, you know, relatable.
Yeah.
Like in
Relatable, I think, is the key term there.
like for instance, you can get away with a character who drinks too much because of the stress they've gone through and the bad things they've seen, but you cannot get away with a character who cheats on his wife or a significant other. They're
Right.
not going to identify with him anymore, or husband or significant other if it's a female. They're not going to identify. There's going to be a significant part of the readership that just turns them off right there. So like in Drop Trooper, it was easy because the main character was, you know, a street kid who grew up on his own, running cons on people. So he didn't trust anybody. So it was easy to have a flaw that he couldn't relate to the other people there. He didn't trust them. He didn't want to be in a leadership position. He was good at fighting and he liked doing that, but he didn't want to lead anybody or be responsible for them. And that was the flaw he had to work on, to trust people, to let other people in. But as the series goes on, and for a long series, this is where you have to have character growth. You have to give new flaws that crop up that weren't really obvious before. Like I don't know if you call this a flaw, but several of the military characters that I have in books that have seen lots of action develop at least mild PTSD because you do. Even if you handle it really well and you have a great support structure, there's going to be some stress and strain that takes its toll on you after having seen the kind of combat that these people have seen, and which is kind of unrealistic. But you're following the same character through 12 books. They see a lot more combat than a real person, even like a special forces soldier would, because they're the one who you see everything through their eyes. In the Earth at War series, the main character is a veteran who got hit bad by PTSD, and nobody was attempting to help me. Self-medicated through alcohol, lost his marriage, and it would have been easy to take that too far, to make them too flawed. But you have to spend part of the first book in a case like that, bringing them back to someone that's relatable. And but yeah, you learn, because I did write a series. I won't name it because there's no point in talking about it now. But there was a series where the main character was very flawed in a realistic way, and people did not like them. I don't even say it's a he or a she, but they did not like the fact that this person had realistic flaws and was self-destructive in a lot of ways.
I think one of the dangers, especially writing on top of writing a too flawed character where people are not going to empathize, or it's just kind of outlandish in that aspect, or that consideration. I think the one of the pitfalls of newer writers is creating flaws that then they twist to assist the character in solving the main problem of the book. And I think that, yes, that is an interesting way to do it. Like, the only example that really comes to mind is Monk from the TV show. He was OCD, and because he had that disorder, there was a lot of things that he saw and did that were different from the rank and file detectives. He could see things
It's
that
like
other
the
people
good
didn't.
Doctor, that series now with the
I haven't
autistic
seen that
doctor.
show. Okay.
It's a trope, right? Autism. I can't remember what character.
Autism is a superpower.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not
yeah.
see, but there's nothing wrong with that. But I understand what you're saying. Like sometimes we overdo the this is how it got fixed thing.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
Because you can have flaws that don't affect the plot. They affect characters. Multiple things, multiple layers to a well-rounded story, character, plot, world building, all that. And your character can have a flaw that doesn't do anything for the plot, but builds his character. And when I first started
it gives him
writing,
a character arc.
yeah, I mean, it 100%. That just adds another layer to your story to give it more depth than he has I don't know, an aversion to gunpowder, and then in the last scene he smells the gunpowder and saves everybody from getting blown up. Something simple like that. You don't want to like
That
constantly
doesn't
create.
seem contrived at all. John.
No, it doesn't. No, it was the first example that came to mind. Okay.
Oh man, you see, in real life, I'm my flaw is that I'm too handsome, and so everywhere I go, my
Indeed.
poor wife, she's got to deal with women just throwing themselves,
Oogling.
Yeah, it's a sad day.
Steve, I'm not
You can just move
not gonna
past
touch that.
I've got a shirt that I wear all the time
Trophy husband.
that it says trophy husband on it. And I tell everyone that sees it, they're like, that's awesome. I mean, yes, I bought it. My wife did not buy it for me. I bought it for myself and I wear it proudly.
Well, somebody had to.
Yeah.
Steve, in the Black Badge series, James Crowley is a character that is not necessarily a likable character. He's not a warm, fuzzy, let's rally around this guy kind of character, but he does good things. Is that how intentional was that? To make a character that
Quite.
is not necessarily a likable character, but is likable through his actions.
Quite. From the very first 10,000 words written on Dead Acre, James was he was angry, he was violent, he was everything that an ex-outlaw you would assume to be. My favorite parts of the books, there's a scene in Cold as Hell where James Crowley comes across some Pinkertons that had been stripped down naked, frozen, and tied up. And in that moment, we get this really fun picture of James. First of all, he's a dick in this scene, right? And as I'm listening to Roger Clark's performance of it, I mean, I'm getting chills, but because of how good Roger Clark performed it, but also because James, he just takes no shit in that, right? Like these guys, he is a badass that's gonna get what he wants out of these guys, and if they want to get free, they're gonna answer his questions. There's no sympathy, there's no empathy. There's tell me what I want to know, and maybe I'll let you live. And the challenge there, yeah, like you said, is making him likable. And one of the things that we created as a flaw, as funny as this is, because we just joked about it, my greatest weakness is being too good, too honest, too whatever. James's weaknesses are that despite the fact that he knows what the White Throne wants him to do, he is going to do what he thinks is right in that moment. Even when it completely contradicts what he's been told to do, right? Like he's got this relationship with Rosa Massey, and although there's this weird, she's actually 20 years younger than him. He met her when she was 7 or 8 years old, and then he's lived undead for 20 years. Like in real terms, like James is like a 50-year-old dude who's got this sort of sexual tension with this 21-ish, 23-ish year old woman. And so there's this really fine line that we have to walk there where it's not inappropriate. It's not weird. Although there's plenty of 50-year-old guys married. There's Leonardo DiCaprio, so
yeah, but he doesn't look 50.
No, and James doesn't either. James looks like a 26-year-old guy, in like perpetually. That's what he looks like. And so all the flaws that we had to create with James, he can't die. All the flaws we had to create with him were super intentional, and we create moments in those books where we get to see badass James Crowley doing what's right by being an asshole. And it's fun.
One thing that I like I've only done it a couple times, but I like reading about it. Is if you have a first person POV character who has a flaw and it's an obvious flaw, but they don't realize it's a flaw.
Mhm.
And throughout the book, they never get the idea that this is a problem. I mean, because they make it anyway, they make it work anyway. But people reading it, if they pay attention, can see, oh yeah, that he's like he's got a huge ego. He doesn't think anybody else can do it. He's got to be the only one to do things.
James reflects a lot in internal, right? In a first person, everything is internal dialogue, right? So I tell people all the time, if you're writing in first person, you don't need italics. Although Rick has argued with me on that, and I'm okay with that. I get his points on that. In Drop Trooper, there's a lot of sort of internal dialogue, and I, Rick, I'll just say I've come to terms with what you've said, and I think that I agree. But for me, everything that James thinks is what's written on the paper, because he's actually telling the story like he's sitting in a campfire. So he often reflects on the mistakes that he's making, acknowledging that he actually knows they're a mistake in terms of the grand scheme of things, but he's going to do it anyway, because that's what he feels like needs to happen, even if it hurts him, even if it hurts his relationship with the White Throne. He's going to do it because X, Y, Z. And I enjoy playing off of his what's it called when you're
Introspective,
sort of his chivalry. I like
okay.
to play off of that, while also finding the balance in 2023 of what is acceptable as chivalry. Of course, takes place in 1890, so suck
Right.
it
up. When Rick, when you mentioned that, and Steve, when you're talking about how James operates and does things, Chris Rucchio in his Sun Eater series, the main character's name is Hadrian Marlowe, and the whole book is basically him writing in his journal about his life, and he breaks the fourth wall occasionally, and he'll say things like, "This is where I messed up, reader, and you'll know what happened, but I didn't, and so I must go on with the story," or something along those lines. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but the funny thing is that the narrative is so melodramatic. Sometimes you forget that it's first person and that he's telling you the story. But what's interesting about that is he is self-aware enough as a character that he knows he's melodramatic. And then the characters in the books make fun of him for being melodramatic. And they call it like the Marlowe anger or the Marlowe stare or something like that. And so he plays up that kind of fault in being melodramatic about everything. He plays that up in the narrative, also when he's talking to the reader, when he's breaking the fourth wall, and also when the other characters are kind of making fun of him for it. So and it is 100% why I love the book so much. Just the way that it's written in that style. It wouldn't work for a lot of series, but because this series is a space opera written in the shape and form of an epic fantasy, it can take on this over dramatic kind of melodramatic tone in the entire writing. And because you know that it's him writing in his journal, and because they make fun of him, you can actually laugh at how he describes a scene, because man, this is really melodramatic. And you're like, oh, well, that's because Hadrian is. So of course that's the way it's described. And it's phenomenal work.
Chris Vallon and I wrote a delusional character. It was about a 5,500, 6,000 word prologue to book 2 of our superhero series. And it's told from the first person, present tense point of view of a character named Battle Gear, who was a villain. And because he's telling a story, it's first person present tense that is also first person past tense, because he's in the present telling a story about what happened while commenting on the story in present tense.
Nice.
It was a bit of a challenge, but it was fun. Anyway, at the end of it, his arch enemy, which is Eagle Star, which is sort of a Captain America, Superman smash up, He shows up, and there's this delusional experience that Battle Gear is telling the story of, where he believes that Eagle Star is a fan of his, even though they're arch enemies. Like, it was Eagle Star who encouraged me to keep doing the villain or the villainous things because he needed me as that whatever. And as we're writing it, we're really trying to find all those opportunities to make sure the reader knows this guy is delusional. This isn't really what happened.
Right.
Right. Eagle Star probably showed up and kicked his ass, but like in his mind, they sat down and had this conversation about keep going, bro. You've got this. And Eagle Star doesn't talk like Eagle Star. And even now, I haven't released this book yet. I'm still worried that the reader is not going to be, forgive me for saying this, intelligent enough to realize that Eagle Star or that Battle Gear is out of his mind.
Right.
Reminds me of Mystery Men, the movie Mystery Men, where Captain Amazing gets them to set loose Casanova Frankenstein because he doesn't have anybody to fight anymore.
Right. that's the idea there. It's like Battle Gear's about to give up, but Eagle Star shows up and tells him, no, you can't do that, because then what would I do? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, you know, there have been whole books and whole writing courses built around the idea of save the cat. You know, if you've got a character that's not likable enough, stick a cat in a tree, have them do something heroic, so that the reader can build some sort of rapport with that character.
We're putting a lot of things in trees today, Hank.
And then setting the tree on fire with the cat in it.
Exactly. If you really want to piss readers off, set the tree on fire with the cat.
like to do the exact opposite with the cat. I like to
out of the tree.
No, I like to present. I don't do this all the time, but I like to present characters in a positive light, and like present what they're doing in a certain light, so the reader does not make the connection that what they're doing is, let's just say, evil, right?
Yeah.
And then when you get to another part in the book, there's another piece of information that gives you context to all of the past events, and then you're like, oh, he was doing bad things the entire time. I love it's kind of a subtle twist, because you're saying save the cat so you can give empathy to a bad character. I like to do the reverse and make the reader dislike a character that they have followed and loved the entire time. One of the things I'm trying to write a fantasy series where the main character, I'm trying to write, if you guys are familiar with World of Warcraft, I'm trying to create an Arthas character, because Arthas is my favorite fictional fantasy character of all time. And so I am building this character to be righteous through all of the books. He is righteous and steadfast in his faith, and you follow him and you believe in what he's doing and all of this. And then at some point near the end of the series, you find out he was wrong the entire time. But because he's so steadfast in that belief, he doesn't believe that he could possibly have been wrong, and keeps on going and goes from the hero that everybody cheered and supported to the villain that now everyone hates. But he has remained the same throughout the entire series.
That's a bit of the Torsten Unger character in our Buried Goddess saga. He's a paladin type character, and he's so righteously on the side of his god that it doesn't matter how wrong it looks to the reader. He's doing what upholds his vow to Iam. And we had some people who just really hated him. Why is he so stupid? They couldn't grasp the concept, right? When you've been a pastor, you can understand the concept of it. This doesn't look right, but I'm doing it anyway.
For sure,
Right.
yeah.
And so we had a whole arc where he was blind. As a matter of fact, an entire book where Torsten was blind, and this was from his perspective. That was the hardest flaw either Red or I have ever had to write. Thank God he and I were writing it together, because as we would go through each other's chapters, we'd go, hey, you just had him see something.
Right.
And it's hard, man. The blind character is hard.
I find kind of the opposite with me from what Josh does. I have a problem. I don't know if it's a problem, but a tendency to take antagonists and turn them into likable, relatable characters because you always have the thing where everybody's the hero of their own story.
I was about to say that. Yeah,
And,
that
and I've several times now taken people who start out like a series as a bad guy and turn them into like a grudging ally. I find that a lot more interesting than just like the mustache twirling type because some of these people are like, especially military science fiction, they're like politicians or military officers for the other side, but that doesn't mean they're bad. They just they have different goals and different
Well, it's kind
roles.
of like the Have in Weber's Honorverse. Well, the first like 8 Honorverses. Then they're dealing with the war with Haven and all that. You've got Forraker and a couple other Havenite officers that you follow, and they're really, really good people. They are great characters, but they're also good people. But they're on the other side. They're the enemy, and you can kind of empathize with both. I really like that a lot.
Well, in Wholesale Slaughter, which is the first series I did with Athon, um, there is the head of the opposing government to the main character starts out, as kind of cocky and irresponsible and very much like just kill them, that kind of casual brutality type deal. But then as you read the books and you get into the head of one of his officers who bothers to get close to him and find out what makes him tick, you see that it's all basically an act to keep everybody else in line because if he shows weakness, they're going to, he's going to be removed. And in the end, he winds up being reasonable and doing the right thing with a little prodding.
Say what you will about Discovery, Star Trek Discovery. I know there's a lot of sort of negative things to say, but they did this flip-flop phenomenally well with both Lorca going from who you thought was good to, and sorry if these are spoilers for you thought he was good, to he's the evil guy. And then they did the opposite with Philippa Georgiou that I thought was really superbly well done, where she was this evil, vile character that we ultimately ended up appreciating and loving. Again, going back to what we talked about last time, where like if you want to really get story down, watch a lot of TV.
Mm-hmm.
Read books, but watch a lot of TV. It's condensed and it's done in such a way where you could really see what they're doing to make you like the character. Find a character that you hated when the series started and then loved at the end and go, how did they do it? Okay, let me just follow that.
right.
And you start to see the
Right.
threads unfurl or whatever the analogy would be.
Well, this has been a fascinating discussion on character. Once again, join us next week where we're going to delve into plot and how does character become plot and all of that fun stuff. 4 authors, 8 eyes. Thanks for.
But we're all wearing glasses, so wouldn't it be 16?
Oh, that's hilarious.
Dang, it was a good try, but
I saw where you were going.
Yep. You saw it because you had glasses on.
That's true.
That's right. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We will see you again next week.
Bye.
Bye.